Keir Starmer may have just won the biggest prize in British politics. Number 10, Downing Street. But only weeks into power, his leadership is already under fire. Not from the opposition, not from Nigel Farage, not even from the Conservatives, but from his own side. Senior Labour figures, including Emily Thornberry and Andy Burnham, are warning the Prime Minister to stop making mistakes or risk tearing the Labour government apart before it's even begun. Thornberry, openly positioning herself as a possible deputy leader, has fired a stark warning. If Starmer continues on this path, Britain could be handed on a silver platter to Nigel Farage. Meanwhile, Andy Burnham, the influential mayor of Greater Manchester, has called for a complete reset, saying Starmer must reconnect with the heartbeat of the Labour Party or face rebellion from within. And now, as candidates jostle to replace Angela Rayner as deputy leader, Starmer faces the fight of his political life, not against the Tories, but against his own Labour family. Tonight, we're unpacking the full story. What mistakes Starmer has already made, why Angela Rayner's departure triggered chaos, who could replace her as deputy leader, and whether Labour is on the brink of another civil war. This is more than a power struggle. This is about the very soul of the Labour Party. Stay with us as we dive deep into the warnings, the rivalries, and the future of Britain's government. Keir Starmer came into office with the promise of stability. After years of chaos under the Conservatives, from Boris Johnson's scandals to Liz Truss's economic crash to Rishi Sunak's faltering leadership, voters wanted calm, professionalism, and competence. And yet, in his first months as Prime Minister, cracks have already begun to show. Angela Rayner's resignation was the first major blow. A close ally, deputy leader, and symbol of Labour's working-class roots, Rayner stepped down after revelations around her property tax affairs. Her departure left not just a gap in cabinet, but a wound in Labour's identity. Then came Starmer's reshuffle. In an attempt to tighten his control, he sacked high-profile figures, including Louise Haigh and Powell. But instead of projecting strength, it sparked rebellion. Senior Labour voices, some former cabinet ministers, others rising stars, began whispering that Starmer was already making too many mistakes. And whispering soon turned to shouting. Politics in Britain has always been brutal. The rise and fall of leaders, the backroom whispers, the public criticisms that break through the silence. All of it forms the heartbeat of our democracy. But today, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and leader of the Labour Party, finds himself in a moment of extraordinary vulnerability. After leading Labour to government, Starmer had hoped for a smooth transition into power, a chance to showcase competence and stability after years of Tory chaos. Instead, his leadership has been rocked by a series of self-inflicted wounds, culminating in the sudden resignation of his deputy, Angela Rayner. And now, the knives are out. Senior Labour figures are openly warning Starmer to stop making mistakes before it's too late. Emily Thornberry, a seasoned Labour voice and potential contender for deputy leader, has issued perhaps the starkest warning yet. One more major error from Starmer could hand the country to Nigel Farage. Yes, Farage, the perennial disruptor, the man who thrives in moments of establishment weakness, is now looming once again over the Labour Party's internal struggles. And Thornberry isn't alone. Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester and the man many see as a future Labour leader himself, has called for a full reset. He says Labour must reconnect with its own heartbeat, with the grassroots, with the broader coalition of voices that carried it into power. Burnham has even gone further, publicly backing Louise Haigh or Powell, two recently sacked cabinet ministers, to replace Angela Rayner as deputy leader. What we're witnessing is extraordinary. Labour, barely settled in a government, is already tearing itself apart in ways that feel eerily familiar. To some, it's déjà vu, echoes of Labour's past divisions, where infighting has historically opened the door for conservative revivals. To others, it's worse because this time the threat isn't just from the Tories. It's from Nigel Farage, Reform UK, and the possibility of a right-wing populist insurgency. Tonight, we're going to break this all down. What exactly went wrong for Starmer? Why are senior Labour figures warning him so publicly? What role did Angela Rayner's resignation really play in destabilizing his leadership? Can Labour survive this battle over the deputy leadership without collapsing into chaos? And perhaps the most pressing question, could Nigel Farage really rise from the sidelines once again to capitalize on Labour's mistakes? This is the story of how power, ambition, and mistakes are reshaping British politics, and how one Prime Minister's grip on power is already slipping. Angela Rayner's resignation was not just a routine political departure. It was a thunderclap that exposed Labour's fragility. Her letter to Keir Starmer was gracious on the surface, full of praise for her colleagues, pride in her working-class roots, and reflections on her legacy. But beneath the tone of dignity and regret lay a stark reality. Rayner was pushed out by a storm of controversy, pressure, and mistakes that originated not only from her, but also from the Prime Minister himself. The catalyst was her tax issue, the underpayment of stamp duty land tax on her property in Hove. To her credit, she referred herself to the independent advisor on ministerial standards and cooperated fully. The advisor even concluded that she had acted in good faith. But the verdict was clear. She had failed to meet the highest possible standards of proper conduct. For Rayner, the combination of political scrutiny and media intrusion into her family's private life was unbearable. She chose resignation, saying she could no longer put her children through the constant pressure. On one level, it was an act of responsibility. On another, it was a political earthquake. Rayner wasn't just any minister. She was the Deputy Prime Minister, the Secretary of State for Housing, and, most crucially, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. Her resignation ripped a hole right at the heart of Starmer's government. To Labour members and supporters, it felt like a betrayal of the very values Rayner represented. She was their working-class champion, the voice who never let them forget where Labour came from. Her sudden departure left a vacuum, and in politics, vacuums don't last long. Rivals circle, ambitions rise, and that's exactly what we're seeing now. The reaction from senior Labour figures was immediate and brutal. Emily Thornberry, one of Labour's most outspoken MPs and a potential candidate for the now-vacant deputy leadership, issued a public warning that rang like a fire alarm. She said that if Starmer continued making mistakes, he could hand our country to Nigel Farage. Think about that for a moment. A Labour MP, a loyalist for years, warning that the Prime Minister's errors could resurrect the very man Labour fought so hard to keep out of power. Thornberry's words weren't just criticism, they were prophecy. Because Nigel Farage thrives on establishment weakness. He built his career on exposing the cracks in the system, on pointing to the failures of mainstream politicians, and on offering himself as the populist alternative. And Thornberry isn't alone. Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester, has been equally blunt. In an interview with The Guardian, he said Labour needs a reset, a more pluralistic style of leadership. Translation: Starmer needs to stop running the government like a one-man show and start listening to the wider Labour movement. Burnham's message was clear. If Starmer doesn't open up his leadership, Labour risks losing touch with its own base. And losing touch with the base is how parties collapse. Angela Rayner's resignation has triggered more than just criticism. It has unleashed a scramble for power. The position of deputy leader is one of Labour's most symbolic and influential roles. It isn't just about holding a title. It's about representing the party's heart and soul. Already, names are emerging. Emily Thornberry, of course, has signaled her interest. But Andy Burnham, though unable to run himself as mayor, has thrown his weight behind two sacked ministers, Louise Haigh and Lucy Powell. Why does this matter? Because Haigh and Powell represent a different faction of the party, voices that Starmer tried to sideline. By endorsing them, Burnham is challenging Starmer's authority indirectly. He's saying, "You may be prime minister, but the future of this party belongs to us." This deputy leadership contest could define Labour's future. Will the party double down on Starmer's cautious, centrist approach? Or will it embrace a more pluralistic, grassroots-driven direction, as Burnham and Thornberry are calling for? The stakes couldn't be higher. Because whoever becomes deputy leader will either strengthen Starmer's position or become the rallying point for his opposition. Hovering over all of this is one name: Nigel Farage. For years, Farage has been the bogeyman of British politics, dismissed by many as a rabble-rouser, yet feared for his uncanny ability to tap into public anger. From UKIP to Brexit, he has consistently proven that he can shake the establishment. And now, Labour's chaos is giving him a new opening. Emily Thornberry's warning wasn't hyperbole. If Labour descends into civil war, voters disillusioned with the mainstream could turn to Farage and Reform UK. His message is simple, his style blunt, and his timing impeccable. He doesn't need to win outright. He just needs to peel off enough working-class voters, enough disillusioned Labour supporters, to fracture the coalition that brought Starmer to power. And here's the irony. Labour's own mistakes could be the making of Nigel Farage's next political chapter. On paper, yes, he is still Prime Minister. Labour still has a parliamentary majority. And for now, there's no organized coup against him. But politics isn't just about numbers, it's about momentum. And Starmer is losing it fast. To understand why Keir Starmer is now under fire from his own senior colleagues, we need to look back at how he rose to power and how he governed in his first months as Prime Minister. Starmer entered Downing Street on a wave of relief. After more than a decade of Conservative rule, marked by Brexit turmoil, the pandemic, Boris Johnson scandals, Liz Truss's disastrous economic experiment, and Rishi Sunak's failure to reset, the country was exhausted. Labour promised competence, professionalism, and stability. Starmer himself embodied that promise. A former prosecutor, a man of law and order, a leader who seemed cautious but reliable. For millions of voters, that was exactly what Britain needed. They didn't demand charisma, they wanted calm. They didn't seek radicalism, they wanted reassurance. But governing is very different from opposing. And once in office, Starmer's cautious style began to feel less like stability and more like indecision. His cabinet appointments were tightly controlled, often rewarding loyalty over talent. His communication with the grassroots was limited. His government appeared more like a management team than a political movement that might have been sustainable until Angela Rayner's resignation shattered the illusion of competence. Suddenly, the cracks in Starmer's style became gaping holes. His reluctance to share power, his habit of sidelining strong voices, and his instinct for centralization all looked like weaknesses. And in politics, perception is everything. Angela Rayner's departure is more than just the loss of a deputy. It is symbolic of a deeper cultural divide within Labour. Rayner represents the working-class, straight-talking, proudly northern tradition of Labour politics. She speaks the language of the grassroots, the communities that Labour was built to serve. Her presence in government reassured those voters that Labour hadn't forgotten them. When she resigned, that reassurance evaporated. To many, it looked like Labour's leadership had lost touch again, just as it had during the years of infighting between the Corbynites and the centrists. And once that perception takes hold, it's difficult to shift. That's why senior figures like Andy Burnham are stepping in. Burnham himself is a northern mayor with deep connections to Labour's base. By calling for a reset, he is really calling for a rebalancing of power, a reminder that Labour's strength lies not in one man at the top, but in a coalition of voices. Rayner's resignation has also triggered something else: ambition. The deputy leadership is now vacant, and with it comes opportunity. Figures like Thornberry, Haigh, and Powell see their chance. And when ambition collides with crisis, leaders are always vulnerable. Emily Thornberry's words cut deeper than many realized. To say that Starmer could hand the country to Nigel Farage is not just a criticism of his leadership. It is a reminder of Labour's greatest fear: losing the working-class vote. Labour cannot govern without its base, and its base has always been vulnerable to populist challengers. We saw it with UKIP, we saw it with Brexit, and we could see it again with Reform UK. Thornberry's warning is also a political calculation. By positioning herself as the voice of caution, she is appealing to those in Labour who fear Starmer is steering the party toward disaster. In politics, criticism is never just about the moment. It's about the future. Thornberry, like Burnham, is staking her claim as part of that future. Andy Burnham's call for a reset didn't just rattle Downing Street. It reverberated across the labor movement. In a single phrase, Burnham managed to encapsulate what so many party members, MPs, and even voters have been feeling. That labor under Keir Starmer had become too insular, too rigid, and too afraid of opening itself up to debate. Burnham's brand of politics is rooted in listening. In Manchester, he cultivated the image of a leader in touch with everyday struggles, whether it was bus fares, housing, or cladding victims after the Grenfell fire. By urging Starmer to listen to the heartbeat of the party, Burnham wasn't only offering advice, he was drawing a sharp contrast. Starmer, to many, had begun to look like a barrister managing a case, while Burnham looked like a mayor managing lives. The endorsement of Louise Haigh or Lucy Powell was clever politics. Both women, respected and popular in labor circles, symbolized the talent Starmer had pushed aside. By backing them, Burnham not only gave them credibility, but also subtly reminded the party that Starmer's decisions, particularly his cabinet reshuffle, had created unnecessary enemies within labor ranks. Burnham's intervention, therefore, did two things at once. First, it positioned him as the statesmanlike figure, above the fray of immediate power struggles, focused on the bigger picture. Second, it reminded the labor grassroots that the party had alternatives to Starmer's closed leadership style. In politics, resets are not declared by leaders. They're forced upon them by circumstance. And Burnham, without openly challenging Starmer, had effectively told him, "Change your course, or others will change it for you." But while Labour's internal drama played out, a familiar specter loomed large: Nigel Farage. For years, Farage has been dismissed by mainstream politicians as a nuisance. Yet time and again, he has reshaped British politics. He pressured David Cameron into holding the Brexit referendum. He transformed the UK Independence Party into a populist force. He returned in 2019 with the Brexit Party, hammering both Conservatives and Labour in the European elections. And now, under the Reform UK banner, he's making noise again. Emily Thornberry's warning that Starmer's mistakes could hand power to Farage was not an exaggeration. Farage thrives in moments like this, when the establishment appears weak, divided, and tone-deaf. He doesn't need to win a general election outright. He simply needs to peel off enough votes to destabilize Labour in key constituencies. Imagine Labour losing working-class voters in the North and Midlands, not to the Conservatives, but to Reform UK. Imagine marginal constituencies where just a few thousand votes tip the balance. That's all Farage needs: chaos in the mainstream, anger on the streets, and a vacuum of authenticity. And with Starmer's government already rocked by Angela Rayner's resignation, Labour's internal rows, and whispers of discontent, Farage has been handed a golden opportunity. Every mistake Labour makes, every headline about disunity, every whisper of backstabbing, it all feeds into Farage's narrative that the political class cannot be trusted. Labour knows this. It's why Thornberry's words carried such weight. To hand the country to Farage is to repeat history, to make the same mistakes that the Conservatives made when they underestimated him. And yet, unless Starmer heeds the warning, history could indeed repeat itself. Labour's ghosts are never far away. Every leadership crisis in the party feels like an echo of the past, a rerun of old battles with new actors. For Starmer, the warning lights are clear. When Labour is seen as divided, it bleeds support. When Labour looks uncertain, it loses its moral authority. And when Labour becomes consumed by internal squabbles, the electorate turns elsewhere. The British people are pragmatic. They don't necessarily demand perfection from their leaders. They demand stability. They want to know that their government has a grip on the country's challenges, not that it is distracted by infighting and drama. But in Starmer's Labour, the perception is beginning to grow that too much energy is being spent on internal matters. Angela Rayner's resignation, the row over workers' rights, the whispers of cabinet discontent, all of it paints a picture of a government that hasn't quite found its footing. History reminds us Harold Wilson's Labour governments were strong when they kept their divisions hidden. Tony Blair's government was powerful because it projected unity, even when behind closed doors there were bitter disputes. When that unity collapsed, so too did Labour's grip on power. Starmer is not yet at that point, but he is approaching dangerous ground. One of the central tensions now haunting Starmer's premiership lies in the question of workers' rights. During opposition, Labour promised bold reforms, the biggest expansion of rights in a generation. From banning zero-hours contracts to strengthening sick pay, these pledges became central to Starmer's case for change. They were designed not only to inspire voters, but also to hold together Labour's coalition of support: trade unions, activists, and working-class voters who felt neglected for years. But once in government, whispers began to emerge that Labour might dilute these promises. Business groups expressed concern. Some ministers reportedly urged caution, fearing that radical reforms could spook the markets or alienate middle-class voters. This is the tightrope Labour has always walked: how to be the party of working people while also reassuring the economic establishment. Too far one way, and it risks looking timid. Too far the other, and it risks looking reckless. For Starmer, the workers' rights package is not just a policy matter. It's a test of trust. If he waters it down, he may buy short-term stability with business leaders, but he risks alienating the very people who put him in power. If he pushes ahead boldly, he may energize his base, but he risks headlines warning of economic disruption. The senior Labour figures warning him to stop making mistakes know this. They understand that betraying workers' rights would not just be a political misstep, it would be a betrayal of Labour's identity itself. Amidst this storm, the battle to replace Angela Rayner as deputy leader has begun. Emily Thornberry, long a colorful and outspoken figure in Labour, is positioning herself as a candidate of experience and sharpness. She knows how to take the fight to the Conservatives, and her warning about Starmer's mistakes shows she's unafraid to challenge her own side too. On the other side stand figures like Louise Haigh and Lucy Powell, both sacked from cabinet but carrying strong grassroots support. Their candidacies represent something bigger than themselves, a chance for the sideline voices in Labour. Keir Starmer won power on a promise of competence and unity. But already, mistakes, resignations, and internal revolt are testing his grip. Emily Thornberry's warning, Andy Burnham's reset, the deputy leadership battle, the Farage threat, all are converging into a single truth. The Labour Party is restless, and its leader cannot afford another mistake. Is Starmer resilient enough to weather the storm? Or will Labour's hopes of a new era collapse under the weight of its own divisions? One thing is certain: the coming months will define not just Starmer's leadership, but the future of Britain itself. You've been watching Great Britain. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more political deep dives.